the founders are too busy to even lean on their investors. When the investors show up, it's almost a nuisance. The investors are circling to put more money into the company. They aren't necessarily being helpful because there's just nothing to do. The thing has product market fit, so it's a rocket, and it's all the team can do but to keep up. And a part-time investor just can't help that much, at least at certain stages of product market fit.
Do you not feel that more context, color, texture, and I guess exposure and availability and accessibility to a product, brand, mission statement, journey, adventure, story adds value? Or do you feel that like the value is not necessarily needing to be added if what you see is what you get and the work speaks for you? As someone that's like all about keeping it short and saying more with less, I also find beauty in the details and the context and the character associated with that. So I kind of like the people that overemphasize and everything checks out. Obviously, if it doesn't, then it's almost overcompensating and it works adversely, like you said.
I think it depends on the intention. There's a lot of Clubhouse bios where people are enriching they're magnifying every little thing they've accomplished, and it's clearly in pursuit of trying to signal competency or accomplishment. And in that case, it looks pretty bad. But if you're painting a canvas, or you're just providing surface area for people to be able to spark a conversation with you because you're sharing your interests, I think that's pretty cool. So I think the intent winds up being very obvious on quick read.
Well, I think like a strong bio might be a little bit like a strong essay or a strong story, which is the first sentence should make you curious. That's a hallmark of very often of a good story. The first sentence immediately inspires curiosity and then gets you to read the rest of it. And I would guess it's similar with bios. If you're going to have a multi-sentence bio, the first one should probably make the reader curious. And then after that, you want to fulfill that curiosity. And you could do it either within that bio or you could give them a link. And nothing speaks like having a custom domain. So for those of you who are into self-branding, and let's face it, most of you are, or you wouldn't be on social media, and I'm guilty of that as well, then a personal branded domain is a big deal because it signals a level of seriousness that other people just don't have. Now that said, you have to be a little cognizant of what you put into that domain. Don't necessarily make it a shrine to yourself. That would be a little absurd and signal the wrong thing. See, social signaling is such a complex thing. What we're basically doing, all of us are doing here, and what we're essentially doing all the time that we're not busy trying to make money or meet our most basic needs, is we're just bidding for status, right? We're always trying to increase our status. And bidding for status is a very difficult thing because if you directly seek status by talking yourself up, well, that's a low status move because it means that you are nervous about your position in the social hierarchy. And because status is so much of it is based on perception and confidence, if you are signaling that you are unsure of your own status, then why should I grant that you have high status? So bidding for status overtly is a low signal move. So it's a low status move. So what we're always doing as humans, we're in social groups, is we're always bidding for status, but we're doing it in ways that A, don't look like we're trying for status, and B, are adding value to the whole group overall, to the group dynamic and the group mentality, so that the group then confers a sub-status and says, yes, this person is worthy of being a leader or worthy of following. And it's a very tricky game. So bios are part of that because if you have to also accurately know your own status. So for example, if you have like a one-liner bio that's sort of dismissive, but you're a nobody, then people will say, okay, this person's a pretender. They're unaware. They don't even know their own status. Who the heck is this person trying to fake it? At the same time, if you write a bio that's too big, then you come across as a try-hard. So there is an art form to it. And a lot of it is like, again, knowing what the group knows and you know about the group and what you know about yourself. So very often we see this with people who either are too humble, and you almost don't believe them, or they brag too much, and then you kind of know that that's a low status move.
It's like, act like you don't care and they will come back. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, so the highest status thing possible is to not care. If you look at the absolute highest status human beings in human history, it's like Jesus and Buddha. They're beyond mortal needs and mortal cares. Or you could even go to Vladimir Putin. When Time magazine interviewed him as Time Person of the Year, I remember he cut the interview short and walked away. And they basically wrote like, he's the only person we've interviewed who just didn't care whether he was Time Person of the Year or not. I mean, that's real power. So genuine apathy actually is a very strong, credible signal that you have so won the game that you've stepped out of it altogether. That's the highest status move. That said, it cannot be faked. You can't show any neediness whatsoever. So if you're in that position, then you truly do stand alone. You don't care what other people do or think. And you have to signal that in your every move, because if you don't, if you show a moment of weakness, then you're a faker and you're going to crash back down to a needy tryhard, which is actually a very low status place to be.
It's the Kanye.
Naval, I recall you saying either on Tim Ferriss's podcast or your own that building a personal brand around your name is one of the best things you can do. And I'm building a brand right now, and I won't advertise for myself, but that's something that I've been considering a lot, and I've been getting other people to tell me different. And part of that is because I'm a professional in the medical dental space, and I'm wondering if there's a risk at all to my license or being targeted in such a way that I should worry about that using my name. And I'm wondering, maybe the audience has some similar concerns, but I do recall you talking about that on other podcasts or other platforms. And I'm curious if you think that still applies in this context.
Well, using your own name is a very audacious move. It will annoy people. Who is this monkey to stand out over the other monkeys and say that his name is worth something? So it's very audacious. It's not something you're ever going to get a lot of back patting for and a lot of people cheering you on. And it's a high accountability move. You're taking risk. You're overtly and publicly taking the risk of humiliation. And frankly, if you're not confident enough in your own abilities to publicly take the risk of humiliation, then you don't deserve the status that comes with being a leader. Essentially, a leader is someone who makes a bid for status and succeeds. If you bid for status and you fail, then you're thrown in the back of the pack. So you have to show that you're worthy, and obviously there are many ways to show you're worthy, and they require actually giving to the group and the community in some overt, sacrificing, or intelligent way. But if you're not willing to take the risk of stepping up there, then you absolutely are not worthy of being a leader. A leader, by definition, sticks his or her neck out. And so if you want to have the brand around your name, then you literally cannot care what other people think. That said, I don't necessarily think you should go out there and start stamping your name on everything. That is also a little bit of a low status needy move, right? And there are people who have managed to do it somewhat successfully in the business world, like Trump was famous for it before he became president. He would just stamp Trump on a bunch of things. And that was supposed to signal high quality or high whatever. But generally, you don't want to build a name just around building a name. That's like the lowest status move. Like if I said, or it's like Kanye or Nike, I take that back. Kanye is actually obviously a good singer and performer, right? So that's why he got the name. So you want to get the name brand by doing something else. So you don't set out to brand yourself by saying, hey, I'm going to build a brand around my name and I'm going to be famous. That's a low status move, and it's not a very humble move. But what you can do is you can say, hey, I'm going to be the best in the world at X, and I'm going to put it under my name so people know whether it's good or whether it's terrible, that's me, right? Then you're taking on accountability and you're taking risk. So I would say, you don't brand yourself. That's sort of a nonsense concept. You do something that is worthwhile, and then you are willing to stick your neck out by putting your name on it. And if it's great, then people will remember you. And if you're terrible, then people will blame you. But you're taking a risk, and you have to take that risk. You cannot look for validation from other people anytime that you are sticking your neck out. It's just not the way the world works. If being a leader, if taking risks to become famous or successful or wealthy, if any of these things were socially applauded, then we'd all be there. We wouldn't have to stand around wondering about it. But all of these things required going against the grain, going against the crowd. You're never going to have the crowd's approval while you're doing anything truly worthwhile. That's just my view on the world.
Well, it's too late then too, right? Like the minute it's publicly, I like to think that like I'm average in the sense that like my success rate is roughly proportional to how many competitors I have, right? Like each competitor has like an equivalent chance of winning. And so like I want to pick games that have as few competitors as possible. And one way to do that is to pick a difficult game, pick a game that feels like play to me, work to others, etc., to sort of minimize that from happening.
100%. Thank you so much for the feedback. And I totally and 100% agree with you that I'm not at all trying to go out and brand my name to make it famous. I in fact,
it's going to happen anyway too, right? Like if you build a company, your name you can name that, Twitter is not called Jack, but everyone knows Jack, right? So like it will happen. The beauty of the internet or is it's just built in. It's built into the system.
Yeah, well,
Sure.
an example there would be like Linus and Linux, right? Now, the beauty of that is it's named after Linus. I don't believe he named it. I think maybe other people might have named it that, or maybe he was just doing it for themselves, but it wasn't like this self-aggrandizing, chest thumping, look at me, I made Linux, but it's indelibly branded with his name. And so whether it succeeds or fails, if Linux is a big smoking pile of crap, then it's always going to stick to his name. But if it's a huge success, like it turned out to be, then that's also going to stick to his name. So that's a pretty good example of personal branding involving a product.
Another good thing to look at in that sense is Tom York and all the Radiohead albums being an individual LLC just under their name, just in case there was any form of liability or risk associated with any of those products, from sample clearance any of the music and the peripheral products of merchandising and apparel that came along with it. If there were any issues of any form of lawsuit or legal contingent problem, it would be absolved, and it wouldn't reflect upon the Tom York name, but it would reflect on the Radiohead individual LLC of that project. So it's also like a very good move for protection. And I think that, Kanye is a perfect example of somebody, like, he posted his 2016 contract that he's trying to bring into 2021. But in the interim, you don't see much music coming out under Kanye West. You see it coming out under Sunday Service. You see it coming out under Yeezy. You see projects like Yeezus. You see the iterations in the same way that Diddy and Sean Combs and so on and so forth have done. And each one has its own value. Each one is checked out with dotting its I's and crossing its T's and going through the legal loops. So in turn, it's a very smart move for protection. And if it all comes back because your brand is strong enough anyways, you are the seed to the tree, to the branches that those names are.
Something I'm interested to see, like, as a kind of, like, comes out of Naval's question and Craig's question, is like, are we going to see non-specific, like non-individual human name brands getting built by individuals? Are we going to see like more and more anonymous millionaires and billionaires able to build brands almost secretly and like entire careers under pseudonyms?
Well, what's interesting is that mediums like Clubhouse are changing that calculus a little bit. Like, you could have built an anonymous bot brand on Twitter. It's very hard to do that on Clubhouse because this is a real identity-based system. And of course, there's a human voice attached to it. The same way you could have had a brand account on Twitter, like, let's say, like Wendy's, famously run by like the Wendy's social media manager, who's very clever. But on Twitter, like, you'd know that person. And the moment Wendy's tried to switch that person out for somebody else, you would immediately know. Sorry, on Clubhouse. So Clubhouse in this live chat format forces a level of authenticity that I think we all as humans crave, which you can't get on the other social media platforms. This is truly a person-to-person platform. And
well,
it would be really interesting to see how
live performance is really interesting because it's the hardest thing to fake. Like, if you think about almost any art form, like, what is the hardest thing to fake? It's the live performances, right? It's if you compare the live Steve Jobs keynotes, it's like the height, the pinnacle. Why? Because it was the most performed, right? And ever since then, it's gone less and less performed, and now it's totally recorded. And Clubhouse
it's like people, who get impressed by GPT-3 Twitter. And I always view that as like a Turing test for the person getting impressed. If you get impressed by GPT-3 Twitter, then you just fail the Turing test. But on Clubhouse, there's no way GPT-3 would stand a chance, right? It would start talking, and within 2 sentences, you realize it's gibberish. So you're right; it's unfakeable.
Yeah, I remember, like, I moved to Provo and took a science fiction fantasy writing class, and the one of the first things Brandon Sanderson, the teacher, said, he was like, everyone will know you're good. Like, the fact that you're a good writer or not. I mean, this goes actually back to the bio thing. It's obvious in the first sentence. I can, in one sentence, know if you're an amazing writer or not. In 3 seconds of listening to a pianist, you'll know if they're a master or not. Like, it's such an accelerated pace of learning, which I think goes back to the bio thing. Like, the fact that it needs to take you more than 3 seconds means you're not a master. Now you are making up, like, now you are selling me now I'm on your sales page effectively before I get to the email subscription form.
Yeah, the person in charge generally doesn't have to say much, right? They can be quiet when they enter the room.
Yeah, and it's a thing. It's a thing that kind of funnily compounds as well, because you don't have to do it, and so you continue to get credit for not doing it. And all the people who status signal, sort of, it's sort of like the rich get richer of status, like just just honoring your current status position will reinforce it.
Well, high status is a difficult place to be. It's like being the gladiator in the middle of the arena who's killed a bunch of the other gladiators. Now every newcomer wants to challenge you. So if you have high status, then you're always going to be getting weird questions, getting attacks, getting all kinds of people essentially bidding for status by trying to go to war with you. And one of the things you learn early on, when you have social status, is that you don't want to pick fights with people, because there's always a new challenger. There's always somebody who wants to duel you. So you just have to get very, very good at ignoring people who are trying to always create fights. So high status is a very precarious position. High wealth is actually a much safer position. Obviously, intrinsically self-contained is the best position, but if you want to get to some stability in your life, high wealth is far more stable than high status.
We were talking earlier about leverage and how it's sort of, Eric, I'd love if you could elaborate as remind us how you talked about it, but it's sort of like people have to give it to you. Like it's sort of centralized, it's not freedom. It's kind of the opposite of freedom. And I'm curious, like Naval, how do you think about how do you get leverage, but also in sort of a decentralized way? It might mean you're pseudonymous, no one knows you are. Can you what does that future look like where you have?
Yeah, no, we live in the age of incredible, infinite permissionless leverage. Clubhouse is permissionless leverage. Anyone can jump on here and start talking. And if you're saying something interesting, you will build a following really, really quickly. Look, I jump on Clubhouse all the time. And what I do is I go through all the rooms. I listen for 10 seconds into each room. And I'm like, is this person saying something really smart and teaching me something? And if they are, great, I'll stick around. And if they're doing a really good job, I'll follow them. As you said, it's an unfakeable signal. So this is a prime example of how, if you are an incredible thinker or speaker, or you have some great insight, you will build up a following more quickly and more efficiently on Clubhouse than on almost any other medium that came before. If you're a great musical performer, perhaps you have a chance with TikTok. Or if you're a really funny comedian type, maybe you're good on YouTube, whatever it is. But this is the era of permissionless leverage. Now, if you want to crank that up one more level, you can learn to code, and now you can have a little army of robots doing that, helping you out as well. So between media, books, podcasts, and code, we have so much permissionless leverage that all the new fortunes are created through permissionless leverage. It's the old world fortunes where you needed to either have a big hedge fund, a lot of capital that other people gave you, or the worst kind of leverage of labor, where you just have lots and lots of people working for you. But those forms of leverage, I think, are very outmoded. And it kind of boggles my mind. Like, for example, I was touring a construction site the other day. There was like a house that was being built. And as I'm going through it, the workers are working on different parts of the house. And you look at a house and it's so complicated to build a house. It is unbelievably complicated. And it's a lot of work. It's like heavy lifting. And it just kind of blew my mind that these people basically got paid less than someone who's sipping coffee and writing code a couple hours a day. But at the same time, you have to realize that what they're doing is permission leverage, right? It's a lot of labor involved. It's sort of well known how to do that. So the creative side of it is mostly gone. It's mostly just execution. And it's only a matter of time before they get replaced by machines and robots. Obviously, some trades go sooner than others. And they don't really get a byproduct of learning. And learning is just a byproduct of curiosity. So ultimately, if you are curious about something, you will be successful at it. And the more curious you are about it, the more successful you will be at it. So if your overwhelming desire is to figure out how to make money and how that works, then you'll make money. If your overwhelming desire is to figure out how or why people are happy and how to be happy, you'll be happy. But it's got to be kind of your overwhelming thing. So learning knowledge literally is power, but the mechanism through which it achieves power is through leverage.
I wonder if, just combining like Naval's comments with what Sahil said about like the ultimate form of leverage being one-to-one, and what Julian said about, the high empathy kind of forms of media being, video, where you can see and feel people's kind of subtle changes, and one-on-one is best because you can react to them. What we give up with our scaled kind of forms of media now is just the inability to feel the audience react or to customize anything. And I wonder if our next big evolution, our next big leap forward is going to be some sort of technology. It was like technology as a placeholder word for what that technology actually is, that allows us to, like, at scale provide deeply reactive media. Whether it's almost like the Neil Stephenson like tablet from the Diamond Age, right? It's a super reactive form of recorded media that lets us reach the audience deeply one-to-one wherever their circumstance is.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the basic Clubhouse feature where we can tell if the audience is interested in what you're saying or not, right? In the real world, audiences, the equivalent is a boo or an applause, or maybe for a concert, they light some candles or they cheer or what have you, but there's no equivalent on Clubhouse yet. And so there's no feedback loop. Now, you're also talking about taking it one level further, which is using technology to create a one-to-one mapping from the speaker to the listener, even when it's a mass audience. I think that's hard to do authentically. Like, yeah, you could probably code up a Cyber Sahil or Cyber Julian, and then that Cyber Julian can sort of talk to people. But I think it's going to have the GPT-3 problem again, right? It's not truly sentient. It's not truly Sahil or Julian. So it's not going to be an authentic experience. And I think humans crave and understand authenticity. And when we get something that is trying to be authentic but failing, that's kind of the worst. I think we automatically reject fakers or poor attempts very extremely.
The emotional uncanny valley.
Exactly. It is. I wanted to use that phrase, but I don't want to confuse you. But you're right. It's exactly an uncanny valley. Uncanny valley is mostly using computer graphics, where you have a 3D image of someone's face, and it's almost that person, but not quite. And it just gives you the heebie-jeebies. It's kind of creepy. So yeah, it's pretty important, I think, to be authentic. And I just don't see how you scale, how you convert one-to-many to one-to-one without losing the authenticity.
So what I find really interesting is what makes somebody a very compelling real-time extemporaneous speaker. I'm just riffing here for a moment, but I think there might be two components. I think one is almost ironically empathy for the audience. Perhaps not ironic, but here's what I mean. If you can project yourself as an audience member and listen to yourself in real time, if you can run that parallel thread, you can say, Julian, you're really fucking boring right now. So it's figuring out this emotional roller coaster of what people are feeling as you're talking. I think that is one component. I think another component is being able to synthesize.
This is just
think about
about
any
you.
other sport. Like, think about a sport. Do they play for their audience? No, they play to win. That is literally the only reason that they're on the field, is to win. And so, like, if you want these people to play the best, you put them in a bubble with no audience.
Yeah, like playing for the audience is also inauthentic, and people, even though the people will deep down detect that, someone who's playing to the audience will eventually be boring to the audience.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. I really like that framework. That resonates. Part of it also, I think, is just the authenticity of having a conversation with a buddy, like you guys are referring to. The more you can let.
It's also about risk, I think. Like, it's risky to talk about the things that are in your head and you haven't talked about them before. You haven't performed them hundreds and hundreds of times. Like when you're reading a script, and there's obviously, this is a spectrum, so you can have things that you've never talked about. You have you have your bits that you go to. I think it's actually very similar to sort of stand-up comedy. But I think it's about the risk. It's about the fact, this is why live performance is interesting, even though you can go listen to an album and it's higher quality. You don't have to go to a music festival. Is because you're like, it's the risk involved, and
it's risky,
and it's the scarcity there.
Yeah, it's hard to be interesting for long periods of time. Most people cannot speak extemporaneously on many topics and synthesize them on the fly, as Robbie was saying and Julian was saying. These are difficult talents. So what ends up happening is most people, when they have to go live, they end up resorting to talking about politics, news, weather, sports, because these are things that are also live. So there's always something, you can always say the old things again in a new way about new data. So talk radio tends to degenerate into those categories. But now if you get out of those categories, what remains? If you want someone to just talk extemporaneously live, there are very, very few people who can do that for long periods of time and stay interesting, right? Most of the few remaining ones you'll find are in comedy, and even those are heavily rehearsed, right? A good comedian rehearses their jokes over and over, but a good comedian is a good speaker. They're witty. What are they doing? They're telling the truth, the uncomfortable truth in a way that they can get away with it, right? They're showing how to be brave in front of an audience and not get, hit by the mob. It's a classic role of the jester. And so, it's hard to be interesting for long periods of time, and most people can't do it. So you end up with professional comedians being the very small class that can do it. Now, so if you look at talk radio, there's a Howard Sterns of the world, which are basically comedians.